She pushed the cleaning cart down the hallway of the 44th floor at 11:52 on a Wednesday night. The wheels made a soft, steady sound against the marble, a sound that no one else in the building would ever hear, because no one else in the building was ever here at this hour. The badge clipped to her chest read Dorothy Wells. No last name after that, just Dorothy Wells. And below it, the logo of Clean Right Services, printed in small blue letters. And below that, the words, Night Custodial Staff. She was 66 years old. Her hair had gone fully gray sometime in the last 3 years, though she could not tell you exactly when. The uniform was navy blue, the same shade every night, pressed at home. Before each shift, the way her mother had taught her to press her church clothes as a girl growing up in Queens. She wore sensible shoes, thick-soled black, the kind designed for people who spend 8 hours on their feet on hard floors. The treads were beginning to wear smooth. She had not replaced them yet. She started with the large conference room at the end of the hall. 12 leather chairs arranged around an oval table the length of a parking space. Someone had left a coffee cup on the far end without a coaster, and the ring it left behind was already beginning to set into the wood. She wiped it clean with a microfiber cloth and a spray that smelled faintly of orange peel. She straightened each chair so the gap between them was even. She emptied the trash can, a crumpled printout, 2 protein bar wrappers, a sticky note that said, "Call Marcus back," in handwriting she did not recognize. She tied the bag, replaced it, and moved on. The small kitchen came next. 3 mugs sitting in the sink, none of them rinsed. A paper plate with the remains of something that had been reheated twice. A half-empty coffee pot that someone had left on the burner, and the coffee inside had cooked down to something thick and dark and slightly scorched. She poured it out. She washed the mugs. She wiped the counter until it was dry, and then she wiped it again because the second pass was the one that actually got everything. She had learned that somewhere along the way. A lot of things only looked clean after the first pass. The second one showed you the truth. The executive restroom was at the far end of the floor, past 3 closed office doors, and a row of framed photographs mounted on the wall, aerial shots of city skylines, the kind of artwork chosen to fill space without saying anything particular. She cleaned the restroom the way she cleaned everything thoroughly, on her knees, when the floor required it, without rushing, without complaint. The tile was cold under her palms. It was always cold, regardless of the season. That was the thing about marble. It did not hold warmth. It just held whatever you put on it and gave nothing back. When she was done, she stood up slowly. Her lower back registered the movement the way it always did. Now, not quite pain more, like a reminder. She pressed one hand against it for a moment, then let go. She pushed the cart back into the hallway. At the far end of the corridor, past the last closed office door, was a corner office enclosed in glass from waist height to ceiling. The door was solid dark wood with a brushed steel handle, but the walls on either side were transparent, which meant you could see the entire room from the hallway without opening anything. She stopped in front of it. The office was dark, except for the ambient glow coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows on the far wall. The city at night, all lit up, patient and indifferent, the way large cities always are after midnight. A wide desk sat in the center of the room. On the left corner of the desk, a coffee mug. She already knew what she would find underneath it when she went in a ring, faint but real, in the exact same spot it was every single night, because whoever sat at that desk always set his mug in the same place, the way people do when they are moving too fast to notice their own habits. Behind the desk, a long shelf ran the full width of the wall. Books, binders, a small clock, and a row of framed photographs. She could see them from here, even in the low light, because she had looked at them enough times to know exactly where each one sat. A man shaking hands with someone in a suit. A man at a podium, mid-sentence, confident. A man on the cover of a magazine she had seen on newsstands. And in the far right corner of the shelf, smaller than the others, almost easy to miss, a photograph in a plain black frame. A woman and a boy. The boy could not have been more than 3 years old. The woman was smiling not at the camera, but at something just off to the side, the way people smile when they forget a picture is being taken. Dorothy looked at that photograph for a long time. Then she reached into her cart, took out her key card, and let herself into the office. She emptied the trash can. She wiped the desk, the surface first, then the left corner, the ring lifting clean under the cloth. She straightened the items on the shelf without touching the photographs. Then she paused. The small black frame in the corner was tilted just slightly, just enough that the woman in the photograph was no longer facing the desk directly. She reached out and adjusted it. 5 degrees, maybe less. Just enough. She stepped back, looked at it. Then she turned off. The light stepped out into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind her. She stood there for a moment, with her hand still resting on the door handle. The hallway was quiet. The city hummed 44 floors below, going about its business the way it always did, unbothered and unaware. She had stood in front of that door every night for 847 nights. She had never once turned the handle from the outside. Not because she couldn't, because if she did, if she walked in without a reason, without a mop or a trash bag, or something that needed cleaning, she was afraid he would ask her to leave. And she was not ready to be asked. At 9:27 that same evening, the man whose name was on the building walked through the main lobby and pushed through the revolving door without breaking stride. The security guard, stationed at the front desk, a heavy-set man named Gerald, who had worked the evening shift for going on 6 years, looked up and gave a small nod. Nathan Whitfield did not look back. Not out of rudeness exactly, more out of the particular kind of autopilot that sets in when a person has made the same walk so many times that their body does it without asking the brain for permission. Outside, on the east side of the building, a service door opened at almost the same moment. 14 people filed in through it, wheeling carts and carrying supply bags, signing in on a clipboard, held by a shift supervisor in a reflective vest. They moved quietly, efficiently, the way people move when they have learned that the best version of invisible is simply purposeful. Nathan Whitfield did not see them. They did not come through his door. They never did. He got into the back seat of a black car, idling at the curb. The driver pulled into traffic without being told where to go. After 3 years, the route was understood. Nathan Whitfield was 43 years old. He was the founder and chief executive of Whitfield Capital Group, a private investment firm that managed $2.1 billion in assets across real estate infrastructure and early-stage technology. The firm occupied the top 3 floors of the building that bore his name, 1 Whitfield Plaza, Midtown, Manhattan. He had started the company in a rented office in Murray Hill 11 years ago with a folding table, a laptop, and a co-founder named Marcus Webb, who slept on a pull-out couch in the same room for the first 4 months because neither of them could afford to do otherwise. That version of his life felt like something he had read about, not something he had lived. His day had begun at 6:30 that morning with a briefing call from his chief of staff. It had moved through a board prep session, 2 site visits in Lower Manhattan, a working lunch that was mostly working and only briefly lunch, a legal review for a deal closing in 3 weeks, and a dinner with an investor group from out of town that had ended at 9 and run 12 minutes over the time he had allocated for it. Every hour of the day had been spoken for before the day began. That was how he preferred it. Unscheduled time had a way of filling itself with things he did not want to think about. The penthouse was on the 31st floor of a building on East 72nd Street, 8 blocks from Central Park. It had cost $4.4 million and had a view of the city that architects and real estate brokers described as extraordinary. Nathan used the view the way most people use the background, on a computer screen. It was there, he was aware of it. It did not require his attention. He dropped his bag by the door. He poured 2 fingers of water from the kitchen tap and drank it standing at the counter. The apartment was quiet, in the way that large, expensive apartments in Manhattan are quiet completely, almost pressurized, as if the noise of the city had been sealed out so thoroughly that the silence became its own presence. He sat on the couch and opened his phone. 17 emails, 4 texts from Marcus about a term sheet that needed revision before morning, a notification from the news app he never read anymore, and at the top of his reminders, a small white banner that had been appearing every Sunday night for the past several months. Call Mom. He looked at it for a moment, then he pressed dismiss. That was the 23rd time he had dismissed it. He knew that because the reminder kept a count, and he had never changed the setting. He told himself each time that he would get to it, that this week was particularly heavy, that next week would be better. Next week was always going to be better. The last time he had actually spoken to her was 14 months ago. He had been at JFK Gate B14 waiting for a flight to Chicago for a 2-day deal summit. She had called at 6:47 in the evening, which was the time she always called. He still knew that without having to think about it. He had picked up because he happened to be sitting down, and his hands happened to be free. Two conditions that were rarely true at the same time. The call had lasted 6 minutes. She asked if he was eating enough. He said yes. She asked about the weather. He said it was fine. She said she had seen something on the news about commercial real estate and wondered if it affected his work. He gave her a brief, reassuring answer that was technically accurate and practically meaningless. Then his boarding group was called, and he told her he had to go, and she said of course, and he said he would call her soon, and she said she knew he would. He had not called her soon. He had not called her at all. He was not a cruel man. That was worth saying plainly, because what follows in a story like this can make it easy to draw that conclusion. And it would be the wrong one. He had donated to 4 foundations in the past year. He had spent 40 minutes on the phone with a 26-year-old entrepreneur he had never met, because someone on his team said the kid reminded them of Nathan at that age. He could be generous. He could be warm. He simply could not be still long enough to notice what his stillness might have meant to someone else. Before he left the office that evening, he had done something he had been doing for the past few weeks without entirely meaning to make it a habit. He stopped at the security desk and pulled up the lobby camera feed on the monitor Gerald kept facing outward. He looked at it for maybe 15 seconds. Empty lobby, marble floors, the revolving door motionless. He did not know why he kept doing that. He had not examined it closely enough to find out. He told himself it was due diligence. He told himself a lot of things that were easier than the truth. He put the phone face down on the cushion beside him and leaned his head back and looked at the ceiling. Somewhere in this city, 12 miles away, in a house in Queens, his mother was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she had stopped drinking. His number was on the screen. Her thumb was not moving. To understand why Dorothy Wells was on the 44th floor of that building, you have to go back past the 847 nights, back to a Tuesday morning in March 3 years earlier. The house on Merrick Boulevard in Jamaica, Queens, was a 2-story colonial with green shutters that she had lived in for 31 years. The hallway, running from the front door to the kitchen, was lined with photographs spaced evenly on both walls. Her son, at 5 years old, with a plastic baseball bat, squinting in into the sun. At 9, in an oversized suit at his grandfather's funeral. At 14, on a basketball court, mid-jump, the ball just leaving his fingers. At 18, in his graduation cap, smiling the way young people smile when they believe everything is about to begin. The photographs continued on the right wall. Him at 22, at 26, and at 31, standing outside a glass building in Midtown Manhattan, one hand in his pocket, looking directly at the camera. Confident, tired around the edges, trying not to show the tired part. That was the last one. There were no photographs after 31, not because nothing had happened. Everything had happened after that, but the things that came after happened so fast, and she was so rarely in the room when they did that. There were no pictures that included her. She had not known how to ask for any. His old bedroom was at the end of the hall. She kept it exactly as he had left it. Single bed, blue comforter, 2 textbooks, stacked in the corner. On the doorframe, at 4 feet 3 inches from the floor, his name written in her handwriting in pencil, Nathan. From the afternoon, she measured him, and he stood very straight and held his breath, as if an extra inch might appear if he tried hard enough. She had not painted over it. She changed the sheets on his bed once a month. Her hands knew how to do it, and she was not ready to give them a reason to stop. On that Tuesday morning, Dorothy sat at the kitchen table with coffee that had gone cold. His contact was open on her phone screen, not because she had been about to call, but because she had opened it and then sat there. The way you stand in front of a refrigerator, knowing you are not actually hungry, but unable to close the door. She put the phone face down. The last call had been 4 months ago. Before that, 6 weeks of silence. Before that, a birthday text that arrived at 11:42 at night. She was not angry. She understood how a person disappears into their own life without meaning to. She had watched it happen slowly, then completely. What she did not know was how to call him. Not the mechanical part, the other part where you call someone you love and no longer know how to begin. So she did something else instead. 3 weeks later, Dorothy Whitfield walked into the offices of Clean Right Services on West 34th Street and filled out an application for a position on the night custodial crew. In the space marked last name, she wrote Wells, her maiden name, the name she had carried for the first 24 years of her life, before she married Charles Whitfield on a Saturday in June, and took his name without a second thought, because it was simply what you did back then. She used Wells now, because Whitfield was on the door of the building. If anyone connected those two names, the conversation that would follow was one she was not prepared to have. The man who reviewed her application, patient, efficient, clearly working through a long list that week, asked why she was applying for night shift custodial work. She told him she had experience in service work. She told him she preferred nights. He looked at her for a moment, then wrote something down, and told her she would hear back within the week. She was assigned to 1 Whitfield Plaza. She stood in the parking lot, reading the assignment sheet for a long time. A woman passing by asked if she was all right. Dorothy said yes. She got in her car. She sat there a while longer. Then she drove home and ironed her new uniform. The night she started, she stood in front of the mirror on the back of her closet door and looked at herself. Navy blue shirt, navy blue pants, a badge that read, Dorothy Wells Knight, Custodial Staff. She did not recognize the woman looking back, not because of the uniform, but because the last time she had worn a uniform to work was 18 years ago, and she had been a different version of herself then, younger, less familiar with the particular weight of a quiet house. She picked up her car keys and drove west on the expressway. 12 miles. She had made this drive in her mind so many times that doing it with her hands felt almost ordinary. She parked in the service garage on the east side of the building, clocked in, and rode the service elevator to the 44th floor. When the doors opened, the hallway was dark. Then, the motion sensor lights blinked on ahead of her, one panel at a time, following her down the corridor like something paying attention. She was the only person on this floor at this hour, the only reason those lights were on at all. She worked through the floor steadily, saving the corner office for last. When she finally reached it, she stood in front of the glass wall and looked in. The desk, the shelves, the framed photographs she could not yet make out clearly in the low light. And on the far right of the shelf, a small dark frame she would not be able to see properly until she was inside. But she could feel it was there. She had known before she ever walked into this building that it would be. She did not open the door that first night. She stood in front of the glass and looked at her son's office the way you look at a place you used to belong to. Then she picked up her mop and kept moving. She had 8 more rooms to finish before 6 in the morning. By the second month, she had started doing things she could not entirely explain. It began with a bottle of over-the-counter pain reliever she found in the middle drawer of the desk. Not hidden, just there, the way things accumulate in desk drawers when a person spends more time at work than anywhere else. She picked it up, read the label, and set it back down exactly where she had found it. But before she put it back, she held it in her palm for a moment longer than necessary. He had injured his right shoulder during his junior year of college. She remembered the phone call, his voice trying to be casual about it, the way young men try to sound fine when they are not entirely fine. She had driven 3 hours to see him that weekend. She remembered sitting in the bleachers of the training facility, and watching him do physical therapy exercises with a patience she had not seen in him before, and thinking that this was the version of her son she hoped would stick around, the one who understood that some things took time. The bottle went back in the drawer. She closed it and moved on. A week later, she noticed one of the books on the shelf had been placed, spine in the title, facing the wall, instead of outward. It was a thick volume with a dark green cover, sandwiched between two others, easy to miss if you were not paying attention. She was paying attention. She slid it out, turned it around, so the spine faced forward, and slid it back into its place. The following night, it was spine in again. She turned it around again. She did not think too much about it. It was possible he grabbed it in a hurry and replaced it without looking. It was possible he simply did not notice or did not care. Either way, she turned it around. She turned it around every night for 4 months, until one evening it was facing the right way when she arrived, and it stayed that way after that. She never knew if he had noticed or if he had simply stopped reaching for that particular book. It did not matter. The book faced outward. That was enough. The coffee ring was a different matter. It appeared in the same spot every single evening, left side of the desk, about 8 inches from the edge. The ghost of a mug set down in a hurry and picked back up again before the thought of a coaster could fully form. She had wiped it clean every night since her first week. But in the 3rd month, she began paying it a particular kind of attention, working the cloth in slow circles, lifting the residue completely, rather than just smoothing it into the grain of the wood. She spent more time on that one spot than on any other surface in the building. She could not have said why. It was just a ring left by a coffee mug, but it was his ring left by his mug on his desk, and something in her required that it be gone by morning. The photograph on the shelf, the small one in the dark frame, the woman and the boy she adjusted every night. Not dramatically, just a few degrees tilting it so the angle faced the desk more directly. She had learned by the 3rd week that it shifted slightly whenever the cleaning cloth moved across the shelf, so she adjusted it back every night, the same 5 degrees. Her hands had memorized the exact position she wanted it in, and they moved there automatically now, the way hands do when they have performed the same motion enough times that the motion belongs to the muscle and not the mind. These were small things. She understood that. They were the kinds of things that left no fingerprint, that registered nowhere, that a person would have to be paying very close attention to notice at all. That was the point. She was not there to be noticed. She was there to be close. Those were not the same thing, and she had accepted that distinction, sometime around the 6th week, quietly, and without ceremony, the way a person accepts something they cannot change. The night she heard his voice through the door was a Thursday in June. She had finished the conference room and the kitchen and was working her way down the hall toward the supply closet when she heard it, low, clip the particular cadence of someone on a call they have been dreading. She stopped moving. The cartwheels went still. She stood in the hallway outside his office and listened. She could not make out specific words. The door was solid, and the walls were thick. And the city was doing what the city always does at 2 in the morning, which is everything at once. But she could hear the shape of his voice, the tension in it, the way it pushed forward with each sentence, and then pulled back like a man bracing against something he could not see the end of. She had heard that particular strain in his voice. Before, not often, but enough to recognize it. The last time had been the night before his college entrance exams, when she had knocked on his bedroom door, and he had said he was fine, in a voice that meant the opposite. She did not knock now. She stood in the hallway with her hands on the cart and listened to her son sound like a man, carrying something too heavy for one set of hands. The fluorescent lights hummed above her. The city moved 44 floors below. She could not go in, not because the door was locked. She had a key. Not because she lacked the right. She had cleaned that office every night for months. She could not go in because going in meant explaining why she was there. And she did not have an explanation that would land softly at 2 in the morning when he was already holding too much. She could not go in. She could not hold him. She could only stand there and be close. That was all she had, for now. The break room in this basement of 1 Whitfield Plaza was not the kind of space that appeared in architectural plans. It existed because it had a narrow room behind the service entrance with 2 plastic chairs, a folding table, a microwave that hummed at a frequency slightly off from everything else in the building, and a row of metal lockers along the far wall, most of them dented at the corners from years of being opened and closed by people in a hurry to get somewhere else. A bulletin board above the microwave held the shift schedule, a laminated safety sheet, and a photograph someone had taped up of a beach that no one had ever asked about. It was 2 a.m. in July when Dorothy first sat across from Rosa Mendez. Rosa was 49 years old. She had come to the United States from El Salvador at the age of 32 with a nursing certification that no hospital in New York would accept without additional coursework she could not afford at the time. So she had cleaned, instead first a hotel in the Bronx, then a medical office building in Midtown, and for the past 7 years, commercial towers across Manhattan through CleanRight services. She was compact and efficient in the way that people become when they have spent years working in tight spaces on a schedule. She did not waste motion. She did not waste words. She carried her lunch in a green insulated bag that she had owned for 4 years and intended to own for 4 more. She was eating a sandwich when Dorothy came in and sat down across from her. They did not speak for the first few minutes. That was not unusual. The break room was not a place for conversation, so much as a place to stop moving. And most people on the night crew understood the difference. Dorothy poured herself a cup of water from the tap and sat with it, not drinking, just holding it the way people hold something warm when they need their hands to be occupied. Rosa finished 1/2 of her sandwich. She looked at Dorothy. Then she looked at Dorothy's hands. She had noticed something in the first weeks of working alongside this woman. Not anything dramatic, just a small thing. The kind of thing you only catch if you have spent years watching how people hold tools. Dorothy gripped the mop handle too high. Not wrong exactly, but careful in a way that experienced custodial workers stopped being careful about years ago. The grip of someone still learning where their hands were supposed to go. Rosa had said nothing at the time. She filed it away the way she filed most things, quietly, in a place she could retrieve later if it became relevant. It became relevant around week 3 when she watched Dorothy spend 6 minutes cleaning a single spot on a desk that had already been clean after 2. "Can I ask you something?" Rosa said. Dorothy looked up. "Sure. Why are you doing this job?" It was not an unkind question. Rosa's voice carried the particular directness of someone who had learned the time was too short for the long way around. Dorothy considered the question for a moment, not because she did not have an answer, but because she was deciding how much of it to give. "I needed a reason to leave the house at night," she said. Rosa looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up the second half of her sandwich and took a bite. She did not ask what that meant. She did not ask what was in the house that needed leaving, or what it was about the night specifically, or why this building out of every building in Manhattan. She simply accepted the answer as the full answer, which was its own kind of respect. What Rosa understood, and what most people who had never worked a night custodial shift did not, was this: the people who cleaned the offices of this city were among the least visible members of its workforce. Not by accident, by design. They arrived after the lights dimmed and left before the lights came back on. They used service entrances and service elevators. They wore badges with their first names only. The companies that employed them were contracted by the buildings, which meant the buildings, technically, had no employees to speak of, just clean floors in the morning and no paperwork connecting the two. There were roughly 2.4 million custodial workers in the United States. The majority earned less than $16 an hour. Most had no employer-sponsored medical coverage. Many worked multiple buildings in a single night to make the hours add up to something livable. They cleaned the offices of insurance companies and law firms and investment groups, places where the people who worked during the day spent considerable energy thinking about benefits and coverage and financial security. And then they rode the subway home at 5 in the morning without any of those things applying to them. They existed in the space between one workday and the next. Necessary. Unacknowledged. The way oxygen exists in a room, you only notice it when it's gone. Dorothy knew all of this now. She had learned it not from a briefing or a pamphlet, but from 6 months of living it. From signing in on a clipboard in a parking garage, from eating in a basement room with a microwave that hummed off-key, from wearing a badge that said Wells instead of her real name, because her real name was on the door upstairs. And the distance between those two facts was the whole story. Starting in the 3rd week of July, Rosa began accompanying Dorothy on the 44th floor. She did not announce it. There was no conversation beforehand, no agreement reached over lunch in the break room. One night, Dorothy stepped off the service elevator onto the 44th floor, and Rosa was simply there beside her cart, already moving, heading toward the conference room at the end of the hall, as if this had always been the arrangement. Dorothy looked at her. Rosa looked straight ahead. Neither of them said anything. They cleaned the floor together in a silence that was not uncomfortable. Rosa took the conference room and the kitchen. Dorothy took the restrooms and the offices along the south wall. They met in the middle hallway around 3 in the morning and finished the last stretch side by side, their carts moving in parallel down the corridor toward the corner office at the end. Rosa never asked about the corner office. She never asked why Dorothy paused in front of it longer than the others, or why she moved differently when she was inside, slower, more deliberate, the way a person moves in a space that means something to them. She watched. She said nothing. She simply showed up the next night, and the night after that, and the night after that. Rosa had learned over 7 years of working in buildings where she was not supposed to be noticed that sometimes the most important thing you can do for another person is simply show up. Not with answers, not with questions, just with your presence. So that is what she did. 8 months after Dorothy Wells first stepped off the service elevator onto the 44th floor, the man whose name was on the building sat in the large conference room at the end of that same hallway and listened to 2 people explain how they would watch everyone else. The conference room looked different during the day. The chairs that Dorothy straightened every night were occupied, now filled with the particular posture of people in a meeting that had been scheduled for a specific purpose. The whiteboards that she wiped clean before sunrise held numbers again. By 9 in the morning, projections, timelines, names in boxes connected by arrows. The table she polished in the dark gleamed under fluorescent light and reflected the faces of everyone sitting around it. Nathan Whitfield sat at the head. Across from him were 2 representatives from Meridian Investigations, a firm that specialized in what their materials described as corporate security, consulting, and threat assessment. The man on the left was named Garrett, and he had the particular stillness of someone who had spent years in rooms where stillness was a professional requirement. The woman on the right was named Chen, and she spoke in the measured, unhurried cadence of someone accustomed to delivering information that other people found unsettling. Nathan had called them because of Brandon Holt. Brandon Holt had been his co-founder. Not in the way that Marcus Webb was his co-founder. Marcus had been there from the folding table in Murray Hill, from the pull-out couch, from the years when the company was more of a conviction than a business. Brandon had come in later at year 4, when the firm had grown enough to need someone with specific expertise in commercial real estate structuring. He had been good at it. Nathan had trusted him with the kind of information that does not appear on any document, the internal logic of deals still in formation, the reasoning behind positions not yet committed to paper. 14 months ago, that information had found its way to a competing firm in Boston, a development deal in Hudson Yards that Whitfield Capital had been quietly assembling for the better part of 2 years, land options, financing structures, partnership agreements in early draft, collapsed in a single week, when the competing firm moved first, with a more aggressive offer built on intelligence they should not have had. The deal had been valued at $180 million. Nathan had watched it go the way you watch something fall, from a height too fast to stop too far to reach. Brandon Holt had resigned 3 days later. No explanation, no confrontation. He had sent a 2-line email, and that was the end of it. Nathan had not pursued legal action, not because he lacked grounds, but because the cost of a public dispute, the attention, the exposure, the implication that his firm could be penetrated, was worse than absorbing the loss quietly and moving forward. He had moved forward. That was what he did. But something had shifted in the process. A recalibration that was difficult to name precisely. Like a compass that still points north, but reads 2 degrees off, and you only notice it after you have already walked a long way in the wrong direction. He had started checking things. Twice, locking his office when he left for the night, reviewing the access logs for the floor's keycard system on Sunday mornings, switching to a separate encrypted channel for internal communications on deals in early stage. These were reasonable precautions. He told himself they were reasonable precautions. Then, 6 weeks ago, he had noticed something on the security monitor at the front desk. A figure in the footage from the hallway camera on the 44th floor moving at the far edge of the frame during a late-night timestamp. He had watched the clip twice and then closed the feed and told himself it was a member of the cleaning crew, which it obviously was, which was not a concern. But he had thought about it again the following morning, and the morning after that. That was when he had called Meridian. Garrett placed a folder on the table and opened it without ceremony. The proposal was 14 pages. It outlined a surveillance protocol covering access to the 44th floor during non-business hours. Keycard logs cross-referenced with building camera footage supplemented by 2 additional cameras to be installed at the elevator bank and the Eastern Corridor junction. Any individual whose behavior fell outside expected custodial patterns would be flagged for review. Reports would be delivered weekly or immediately in the event of anything requiring urgent attention. Chen explained that Meridian had done similar work for 11 other firms in Midtown and Lower Manhattan. She said the word discretion, the way people say it when they want you to understand it, is their primary product. Nathan read the proposal. He asked 3 questions. He received 3 answers that satisfied him. He signed at the bottom of the last page and dated it in the margin the way he dated everything, day, month, abbreviated year, no ambiguity. The cameras would be installed the following Thursday, after business hours. He walked the 2 of them to the elevator, shook hands once each, and watched the doors close. Then he stood in the hallway for a moment. The floor was quiet in the way it was only quiet during the day, when everyone was in meetings, a contained, purposeful silence, different from the silence of the same hallway at 3 in the morning, which was something else entirely, though he would not have been able to say what. He went back to his office. He sat down. He looked at the shelf behind his desk. The books, the framed photographs, the small, dark frame in the far right corner that he kept there because it had always been there, and removing it had never crossed his mind as a thing to do or not do. It was simply part of the room. He pulled up the afternoon schedule on his screen. 4 calls a review session and a dinner he was already calculating how to shorten. He worked until 7:40. Then he closed his laptop, straightened the items on his desk, out of habit, picked up his bag, and walked out. He locked his office. He took the elevator down. Outside, the city was still moving. Inside, the 44th floor was dark and quiet. It was always dark and quiet when he left. He had never once wondered what happened after. What happened after was this. At 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night in October, the service elevator on the east side of 1 Whitfield Plaza opened on the 44th floor, and Dorothy Wells stepped out, pushing her cart ahead of her. The hallway lights came on, the way they always did, motion sensors, triggering 1 panel at a time. A slow blink of fluorescence rolling ahead of her down the corridor like something clearing a path. She had walked this floor so many times now that her body knew it the way your body knows a route you have driven for years. The turns, the distances, the places where the floor transitions from one material to another and your wheels catch slightly if you are not paying attention. She started with the conference room. The table was the same long oval. It always was. The leather chairs, arranged in the rough approximation of order that a full day of meetings produced, some pushed back, some turned at angles, one pulled entirely away from the table and left near the window as though someone had needed a different view and then forgotten to return it. She straightened them all. The whiteboard on the south wall still held the remnants of an afternoon session. Q3 projections in blue marker. A column of numbers beside a bar chart someone had drawn freehand, and in the upper right corner, a single word, circled twice, that she could not entirely make out. She did not erase any of it. That was not her job. Her job was the table, the chairs, the trash. The trash can held a coffee cup lid, 2 crumpled napkins, a printout folded into quarters, and a sticky note that said, "Confirm with legal" in handwriting that slanted hard to the right. She tied the bag, replaced it, and moved on. The small kitchen was next. 3 mugs in the sink, none of them rinsed. This was a pattern she had come to accept as simply the nature of the floor. People who worked the hours this floor kept were not people who had the bandwidth for rinsing mugs. She understood that. She washed them without resentment, dried them, placed them back on the shelf in the same order she always did. Largest on the left, a coffee maker on the counter had been left on the carafe inside, holding the last inch of something that had cooked down past coffee into something closer to its memory. She switched it off, poured it out, rinsed the carafe, and left it upside down on a clean towel to drain. She wiped the counter. She replaced the trash bag. She turned off the light. The executive restroom was the most physical part of her night. The floors were stone, a gray-veined material that looked expensive, and felt it under your knees when you got down to work, the grout lines along the base of the fixtures. She had developed a particular sequence over the months: sink first, then mirror, then the floor, working back to front, so she was never stepping on what she had already cleaned. Her knees still registered the cold, even through the pad she wore. She was 66 years old, and her body was 66, in ways that were not always convenient, but the work still got done. It always got done. She stood up slowly, pressed one hand to the small of her back, for just a moment, then let go. Back in the hallway, she moved toward the row of private offices along the south wall. She worked through them methodically, emptying trash, wiping surfaces, straightening the items that accumulated on desks over the course of a day, the way sediment accumulates at the bottom of moving water. She did not read anything. She did not look at anything longer than necessary. She was not here for the contents of these offices. She was here for the surfaces. By the time she reached the corner, it was 11:40 in the evening. She stood in front of the glass wall and looked in. The city filled the windows on the far side of the office, all lit up the way it always was at this hour. A vast, impatient brightness that asked nothing of anyone looking at it. The desk sat in the center of the room empty. Now, the chair pushed in at a careful angle that she recognized as his angle. The particular way he pushed it in, when he was done for the night, slightly to the left of center, as if he always stood up from the same side. A pen lay on the desk blotter. A legal pad with writing on it sat beside the pen. The desk was otherwise clear. She let herself in. She moved through the room the way she always did. Trash first, then surfaces, then the shelf. The coffee mug had left its mark on the left corner of the desk, same spot as always, a faint ring that had not fully set yet. She worked it clean, with the cloth, slow circles, the way she had learned was most effective for this particular surface. At the shelf she paused. The small photograph, in the dark frame, the woman and the boy, had shifted the way it sometimes did when the cleaning cloth moved across the wood nearby. She reached out and adjusted it. 5 degrees, maybe slightly less. Enough that the image faced the desk directly. Her fingers knew the position without measuring. She stepped back, looked at the room. Everything was in order. The desk was clean. The chair sat at its angle. The photograph faced where it was supposed to face. The trash bag was tied and sitting by the door, ready to go out. She turned off the desk lamp and stepped into the hallway, pulling the glass door shut behind her. She stood there for a moment, the way she did every night, not for any particular reason, just the brief pause between one thing and the next, the natural rest between an exhale and the breath that follows it. The hallway stretched ahead of her, lit and empty. 44 floors below, the city went about its business, without pausing for anything or anyone. She had 847 nights behind her, and no reason to count them as anything other than ordinary. She turned off the hallway light. She pressed the elevator button. She went home. She would be back tomorrow. She had no reason to think otherwise. The envelope from Meridian was on his desk when he got back to the office that night. He had not planned to return. The day had run the way his days always ran, back to back, and then slightly past back to back. And by 7 in the evening, he had been in a car heading uptown with the reasonable intention of eating something and reviewing the term sheet Marcus had sent over before going to sleep at an hour that could still technically be called reasonable. Then his phone had buzzed with a message from Garrett at Meridian saying the first report was ready and had been delivered to his office by courier. And something about that word, delivered physical waiting, made him tell the driver to turn around. It was 11 o'clock by the time he sat down at his desk. The envelope was standard manila, sealed with a metal clasp. The Meridian logo, printed in the upper left corner, in small gray letters. His name was on the front in the clean, block handwriting of someone who had addressed many envelopes professionally. He opened the clasp, slid out the contents, and set the envelope aside. 14 pages, a cover sheet with the Meridian letterhead, a case number, a date range, and a subject line that read Behavioral Assessment, Floor 44, After Hours Personnel, Initial Report. He turned to the first page. The report was organized with the particular tidiness of people who understood that the value of their work was partially in how easy it was to read. An executive summary at the top, followed by sections for methodology findings, photographic documentation, and a final recommendations section at the end. Garrett and Chen had been thorough. He had expected nothing less. It was why he had hired them. He read the executive summary first. One individual had been flagged during the reporting period. Female, approximate age, mid to late 60s. Employed by Clean Right Services as a night custodial worker assigned to floors 38 through 44. Badge registered under the name Dorothy Wells. Her behavior, the summary, noted fell outside the expected parameters for routine custodial work in several specific and documented respects. He turned to the photographic documentation. There were 8 photographs, printed in high resolution on glossy paper, each one labeled with a timestamp and a camera location. The first showed a woman pushing a cleaning cart down the 44th floor hallway. Her back was to the camera, navy blue uniform, gray hair. The timestamp read 11:41 in the evening. The second photograph showed her stopped in front of the corner office, not moving through, not passing, stopped with her hands on the cart handle, looking in through the glass. The timestamp indicated she had been standing in that position for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. He studied the photograph. 4 minutes and 20 seconds was not a cleaning stop. 4 minutes and 20 seconds was something else. The third and fourth photographs showed her inside the office, working, yes, the trash can, the desk surface. But the fifth photograph was the one that made something tighten in his chest. It showed her at the shelf behind the desk, one hand extended, adjusting the angle of one of the framed photographs. She was not cleaning the shelf. She was repositioning a specific frame with a deliberateness that did not belong to someone doing routine work. The timestamp showed she had spent nearly 2 minutes at that particular spot. His gaze moved to the sixth photograph, then the seventh, the eighth. The eighth was the clearest, a closer angle. Better light, the woman standing in the hallway outside his office with one hand still resting on the door handle. Her face was partially visible in profile. The set of her shoulders, the particular way she stood with her weight slightly forward, as though she were considering something she had not yet decided. There was something about the way she stood. He looked at it for a moment, longer than he had looked at the others. Something that registered at the edge of recognition, without crossing into it, a shape, a posture, a quality of stillness he could not place. He turned to the final page. The recommendations section was 4 paragraphs. The language was measured and professional, the kind of language designed to convey concern without overstating it. But the conclusion was unambiguous. The subject had displayed a consistent pattern of behavior over the monitoring period that went beyond the scope of custodial duties. Prolonged stationary observation of the executive office, physical contact with personal items, repeated presence outside standard cleaning parameters. The report used the phrase obsessive behavior once in the 3rd paragraph, and then again in the summary box at the bottom of the page, where it appeared alongside the words potential security threat and recommend immediate termination of building access. Nathan read the summary box twice. Then he reached for a pen. He pulled up his email on his laptop and opened a new message addressed to the facilities coordinator at Clean Right Services. The contact name was in his building management file. A woman named Patricia, whom he had never spoken to directly, but whose email address was there for exactly this kind of administrative matter. He typed 4 sentences. He explained that a member of the night custodial crew assigned to floors 38 through 44 had been identified as behaving in a manner inconsistent with her role. He requested that her building access be terminated, effective immediately, and that a replacement be assigned to the floor rotation. He did not include the report. He did not explain further. He signed his name at the bottom, read it once, and pressed send. The timestamp on the sent email read 11:47 in the evening. He closed the laptop. He stacked the Meridian report squarely on the right side of his desk, where he kept items requiring follow-up. He straightened the pen on the blotter. He stood up, put on his jacket, picked up his bag. He turned off the desk lamp. He signed his name the way he signed everything. Quickly, cleanly, without looking back. He did not know that the hands in those photographs, the ones adjusting the frame on his shelf, the ones resting on the door handle outside his office, were the same hands that had packed his school lunches and held his face when he cried at 12 years old. He did not know anything. That was the problem. That had always been the problem. The lobby of 1 Whitfield Plaza looked the same as it always did at 11:43 at night. Marble floors, polished to a mirror finish. Brass lettering above the security desk, catching the overhead light just so. The revolving door heavy deliberate, waiting for the right card to authorize its turn. Dorothy approached the east entrance the same way she had for the past 848 nights. Badge in her right-hand cart. Wheels quiet on the concrete of the service walkway. The familiar weight of her Clean Right tote bag over one shoulder. She had timed this walk from the parking structure so precisely that she could tell you without checking a clock that it was exactly 11:43. She pressed her badge to the reader. The light blinked red. Dorothy looked at the reader, then at her badge, then at the reader again. She pressed it a second time, holding it flush against the panel, the way you do when you suspect the machine, not yourself. Red, the small sound it made a flat, electronic denial, was no louder than a whisper. But in the quiet of that empty plaza, it landed like something thrown. The security desk inside the lobby was staffed by a man named Curtis, who had worked the overnight shift at 1 Whitfield Plaza for 4 years. He was in his mid-50s, heavy-set, with reading glasses, perpetually pushed up to his forehead, and a habit of keeping a paperback novel open beside his monitor. He looked up when Dorothy tapped the glass. He recognized her the same way you recognize someone you've seen 300 times without ever learning their last name. Her gray, Clean Right jacket. Her cart, the particular way she nodded hello. He buzzed her through the interior door, met her at the threshold. "Evening," he said. "Badge acting up." "It's not reading," Dorothy said. "I tried twice." Curtis turned back to his terminal. He typed something, waited, typed again. His expression didn't change, but his posture shifted, the slight recalibration of a man about to deliver news he didn't ask to be the messenger of. "It's showing as deactivated," he said. "Deactivated." "Yes, ma'am. As of last night. Came through as a management directive from building administration." He looked at her over the top of his reading glasses. "I don't have the details on my end. You'd need to contact Clean Right's site supervisor or building management directly." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "Is it just mine?" she asked. Curtis checked his screen again. Just yours far as I can see. She nodded once. Not the nod of someone who understood. The nod of someone who had decided not to ask any more questions in this particular room. Thank you, Curtis, she said. I'm sorry I can't do more, he said. And he meant it the way people mean things when they're helpless. She stood outside the lobby doors for 4 minutes, not because she was deciding anything, not because she expected someone to come down and explain. She stood there the way you stand in a place you've spent years walking through, when you suddenly understand that the walking is over and your body hasn't caught up to that fact yet. Through the glass, the marble lobby gleamed under its evening lights, the brass lettering above the desk, the revolving door still now waiting for a card that was no longer valid. She could see the security desk from where she stood. Curtis had returned to his novel. The lobby behind him was empty, the kind of empty that only exists in large buildings in the middle of the night, when the business of the day has fully evacuated and left the structure to its own silence. Somewhere above, her 37 floors up the building was still working. She didn't move for 4 minutes. Then she picked up her tote bag, gripped the handle of her cart, and walked back toward the parking structure. She sat in her car for 22 minutes. The parking structure on West 47th offered a partial view of the building's south face. Not the front, not the Grand Plaza side, but enough to see the upper floors, enough to confirm what she already knew. The 44th floor was lit. She could not see into the offices from here. She could only see the glow, the particular amber warmth of a floor that was still occupied, still running, still full of the machinery of a business that never fully stopped. Someone up there was working, or had left the lights on, or both. She sat with her hands in her lap. She did not call anyone. She did not take out her phone. She did not cry, not yet, not in a parking structure under fluorescent lights with the engine off and the heater ticking as it cooled. She just sat. At some point during those 22 minutes, a Clean Right van pulled into the structure, and 2 workers climbed out, laughing about something she couldn't hear. They walked past her car without glancing in. They swiped their badges at the service entrance without a moment's hesitation, and the door accepted them without complaint, and they disappeared inside. Dorothy watched the door close behind them. Then she put the key in the ignition. The drive back to Queens took 31 minutes. At that hour, no traffic, open highway, the city thinning out behind her as she crossed into the outer boroughs. She drove the speed limit. She used her signals. She did everything correctly and automatically, the way you operate a vehicle when your mind has gone somewhere far quieter than the road. She did not turn on the radio. She did not rehearse what she would say to Clean Right in the morning, or how she would ask about the directive, or whether there was an appeal process for a deactivated badge. Those were tomorrow's problems, and tonight, her mind did not want to go anywhere near tomorrow. She passed the same highway ramp she had taken 848 times. She passed the gas station she had stopped at twice, in 3 years, both times in winter. Both times, for the same reason, a windshield so fogged she had to pull over. She passed the exit for the neighborhood where she had grown up, 3 miles off the main road, a left turn she hadn't made in 11 years. She kept going. She started the car. She drove home. The 44th floor lights stayed on behind her the whole way down the highway. She did not look back. The house on Merrick Boulevard was quiet when she got home. It was always quiet. At this hour had been for years long, before Dorothy started driving across the borough in the middle of the night. The quiet was not the absence of something. It was the presence of a particular kind of stillness that accumulates in a house where only one person lives, where rooms go unlit for days at a time, where the refrigerator hum has become so familiar it registers as silence. She hung her Clean Right jacket on the hook by the back door. She set her tote bag on the floor beside it. She filled the kettle and set it on the stove. And while she waited, she stood at the kitchen window and looked at the backyard. The garden she had stopped tending 2 summers ago. The wooden fence her husband had built 31 years back. The maple tree that had grown too tall for the yard, but that she had never been able to bring herself to have cut down. The kettle clicked off. She poured. She sat at the kitchen table. The tea cooled while she looked at the phone. She had owned this phone for 3 years. The screen had a hairline crack in the lower left corner from a drop in the Clean Right locker room during her second month on the job. She had meant to replace it and never had. The crack didn't affect anything. It was just there, a small permanent flaw she had stopped seeing. Nathan's number was in her contacts under a single letter N. Not Nathan, not Nathan's son. Just N. The way you abbreviate something you think about so often that the full name starts to feel ceremonial, too large for everyday use. She had looked at that contact many times in 3 years. She had opened it and closed it. She had typed the first word of a message and deleted it. She had on 2 occasions that she did not like to think about actually initiated the call and then ended it before the first ring completed, both times at midnight, both times in this same chair, both times with a cup of tea going cold in front of her. Tonight was different, though she could not have explained precisely how. Maybe it was the lobby, the red light twice, the flat electronic sound of a door that had been told by someone that she no longer belonged on the other side of it. Maybe it was the 22 minutes in the parking structure watching a floor she had cleaned for nearly 3 years continue to glow without her. Maybe it was the 2 Clean Right workers who had walked past her car, without a glance, badges working perfectly, door opening without hesitation, the building receiving them as if nothing had changed. Or maybe it was simply that she had been holding something for a very long time, and tonight her hands were tired. She pressed N. It rang 3 times. On the 4th ring, the recording began. You've reached Nathan Whitfield. I'm unavailable at the moment. Please leave a message with your name, number, and the best time to reach you, and I'll return your call as soon as possible. His voice on the recording was the same as she remembered, and also not. It was clipped, professional, efficient. The voice of a man who had recorded this greeting once and not thought about it since, a voice calibrated for missed calls from investors and attorneys and people whose time was valuable. It was not the voice she heard when she thought of him, but it was his voice. That part was undeniable. The tone sounded. Dorothy did not speak. She sat with the phone pressed to her ear and the kitchen silent around her. And 11 seconds passed in which she said nothing at all. Not because she had nothing to say. She had things to say that would have taken the rest of the night to say, things she had composed and abandoned and recomposed in the quiet hours between 2 and 5 in the morning, for longer than she could accurately account for. She had sentences that began with, I know, and sentences that began with, I'm sorry, and sentences that began with, I just need you to know, full paragraphs of them, revised and refined, that she had never once spoken aloud to another person. 11 seconds, then it's Mama. A pause. I just wanted to hear your voice. She pressed the red button, set the phone face down on the table. The kitchen was the same as it had been before she picked up the phone. The overhead light, slightly too bright for this time of night, casting the room in that particular late-hour sharpness that makes familiar things look unfamiliar. The window above the sink, dark now. The backyard invisible. The maple tree, somewhere out there, in the dark, too tall, still standing. She picked up the cup of tea. It was cold. It had been cold since before she called. She drank it anyway, not because she wanted it, but because the act of drinking something gave her hands something to do. And her hands needed that right now. She sat for a while longer. She did not rehearse whether she had said too much or too little. She did not calculate the probability that he would listen to it, or when or what he would do after. She did not imagine the conversation they might have, the questions he might ask, the answers she might give. She had learned over the past 3 years that imagining those conversations was a particular kind of suffering that looked like hope but wasn't. She had called. She had spoken. The words existed now in a way they hadn't existed an hour ago. That was enough for tonight. She stood up. She carried the cup to the sink, rinsed it, placed it in the drying rack beside the single plate and the single glass that were always there, because she only ever used one of each. She dried her hands on the dish towel, hanging from the oven handle, the blue one, with the small white stripes worn thin at the fold from years of exactly this. She turned off the kitchen light. She stood for a moment in the dark, one hand still on the light switch, listening to the quiet. Then she went to bed. She had not left the message because she expected him to call back. She had left it because his voice, on a recording, was the closest she had come to speaking to her son in 3 years. That was not nothing. That was something. She turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. Nathan Whitfield arrived at his office. The office at 7:08 on a Thursday morning. He set his coffee on the desk, black no sugar, from the cart on the corner of 49th and Madison. He had used every weekday for 6 years. He hung his coat. He sat down. His assistant had already arranged the morning a printed one-page summary of overnight market movements, a yellow sticky note with 3 action items, and his phone showing 14 unread voicemails. He picked up the phone. He started from the beginning. The first was a fund manager in Seoul, a request to reschedule a call that had already been rescheduled twice. Nathan made a note, reschedule confirmed Friday. The second was the firm's outside counsel, 2 minutes detailed, requiring a follow-up he would hand off before 9. The third through sixth were investors and routine building maintenance. He noted each and moved on. The seventh was from his co-founder, Marcus Webb, recorded at 11:51 the previous night, the voice of a man who had been thinking about something too long and finally decided to say it out loud. Nate, it's Marcus. I've been going over the Caldwell numbers again. I think we're underestimating the liability exposure by at least 18%. Find me before Q4. Nathan wrote Marcus Caldwell. Before Q4. He would find him at 7:30. The 8th, 9th, and 10th were a prospective partner in Dallas, a journalist requesting comment he would decline, and a contractor who had the wrong number entirely. He deleted the last one. He moved to the 11th. It began with silence. Not the silence of a bad connection. A particular kind, careful, deliberate the silence of someone who had picked up the phone and was still deciding in real time whether this was the right thing to do. 11 seconds of it, then a voice he had not heard in 14 months said, "It's Mama." A pause. "I just wanted to hear your voice." The recording ended. Nathan sat with the phone in his hand and looked at the screen for 3 seconds. The timestamp read 11:31 the previous evening. The caller ID showed a number he recognized, the way you recognize a street you grew up on, not because you think about it, but because it is simply part of the architecture of what you know. He did not replay it. He pressed the button that moved him forward to the 12th voicemail. The 12th was from a portfolio CFO. The 13th from his personal banker. The 14th, a driver confirmation. He set the phone down. He picked up his pen. He looked at the overnight summary and wrote 2 more notes. He crossed off 1 action item. He did not delete the 11th message. This was not a decision he made consciously. Or, if it was the smallest possible version of a decision, the kind that registers only in retrospect, when you reach the end of the day and realize you chose one thing over another without entirely meaning to. He had moved past it. He had not erased it. Those were not the same thing, but they were related. At 7:13, his assistant knocked. "Q4 is in 2 minutes. Marcus is already in the room. Tell him I'll be right there." The Q4 review ran from 7:15 to 9:40. 12 people around the conference table, portfolio managers, the head of risk, Marcus, at the far end, with his Caldwell numbers already open, 2 junior analysts presenting for the first time and trying not to show it. Nathan ran the meeting the way he always did, efficiently, without sentiment. He asked the right questions. He pushed back on 2 assumptions in the Caldwell analysis. He approved 3 budget adjustments and tabled 1 pending additional data. He was present for all of it, and underneath all of it, underneath the numbers, in the projections, in a real estate position, in Atlanta, that had underperformed 2 quarters running, there was a sound he could not locate the source of. 11 seconds of silence, then 9 words, not replaying dramatically, not breaking his concentration, just there, the way a word sits at the back of your mind when you're trying to remember it, present enough to be felt, quiet enough to be ignored. He ignored it. He was very good at ignoring things. The meeting ended at 9:40. As the room emptied, Marcus paused at the door. "Good catch on the magnitude," he said. "I was off by more than I thought." "You were close," Nathan said. "Close enough." Marcus nodded and left. Nathan stayed at the table for a moment longer, not long, not noticeably, before collecting his materials and walking back to his office. He did not delete the voicemail that day. He did not call back. He did not ask his assistant to follow up. He did not take any action that would have indicated to any outside observer that anything of consequence had occurred at the 11th position in a queue of 14 messages. He went back to work. His schedule was full. The city outside his window operated on the assumption that everyone in it was exactly where they were supposed to be. He did not delete it. That was the only mercy he gave it. That was the only mercy he gave her. He went into his meeting. Outside his window, 12 miles away, his mother was driving to a building that was not his, to clean floors that were not his, because the ones that were his were no longer available to her. 3 weeks passed, the way weeks do, when you have somewhere to be every morning and nowhere particular to return to at night. Dorothy filed the transfer request on a Monday. She walked into the Buildright Services field office on West 38th Street at 6:45 in the morning, before most of the administrative staff had arrived, and spoke to the shift coordinator, a man in his 40s who wore a Buildright polo and had the manner of someone who had processed enough unusual requests to have stopped asking about most of them. She told him she needed to be reassigned. Different building. She did not elaborate. He pulled up her file. He looked at the system note that had come through from building management 3 weeks prior, the one that had flagged her badge for deactivation. He did not mention it. She did not mention it either. "I've got an opening at 610 Lexington," he said. "Night custodial, same hours. It's a smaller building, 22 floors. Longer commute from Queens, maybe 15 minutes extra each way." "That's fine," Dorothy said. "You sure there's nothing closer available right now?" 610 Lexington is fine." He printed the reassignment form. She signed it. She was out the door by 6:58. Rosa was waiting outside on the sidewalk. She had her green, insulated lunch bag over one shoulder and a paper cup of coffee in each hand, one of which she held out to Dorothy without a word. Dorothy took it. They walked half a block before Rosa spoke. "What happened?" "They changed my access," Dorothy said. "It happens." Rosa looked at her for a moment. Dorothy kept walking both hands around the paper cup, eyes forward. "Okay," Rosa said. That was all. Rosa had a particular gift for knowing when a subject had been closed, and for respecting the closing without making the other person feel that something had been withheld. It was Dorothy had come to understand one of the rarest things a person could offer another person. They parted ways at the corner. Rosa heading toward the A train, Dorothy toward the M. Different buildings, now different routes. The city absorbed them both without comment, the way it absorbs everyone. The corner of 47th Street and Madison Avenue was not a remarkable corner. There was a coffee cart there in the mornings, operated by a man who wore the same gray wool cap, regardless of the temperature, and who could produce a medium drip in 40 seconds flat. There was a news kiosk that opened at 5:30 and a dry cleaner that opened at 7. On weekday mornings, the sidewalk filled quickly, foot traffic moving in the purposeful, slightly compressed way of people who knew exactly where they were going and were already calculating whether they would be late. Dorothy began stopping there every morning before her shift at 610 Lexington. Not every morning at first. The first week it was twice. Tuesday and Thursday routes, she told herself, were incidental adjustments to a new commute she was still working out. By the second week, she stopped pretending it was incidental. She came on Monday. She came on Wednesday. By the third week, she was there every morning, arriving at the corner by 7:14, standing with her back to the coffee cart, looking south, down Madison Avenue, toward the building that bore her son's name. 1 Whitfield Plaza rose 45 floors above the street. From the corner of 47th and Madison, you could not see the lobby. You could not see the service entrance on the east side. You could not see the revolving door, or the brass lettering above the security desk, or the reader that had blinked red twice on a night 3 weeks ago. But you could see the 44th floor. November in New York arrives without apology. The wind that came down Madison Avenue in the mornings during those weeks was the kind that found the gap between your collar and your scarf, regardless of how carefully you'd arrange them. Dorothy had a gray wool coat she'd owned for 11 years, good quality, well-made, the kind of garment that held its structure even after a decade of wear. She turned the collar up against the wind and stood with her hands in her pockets and looked up at the 44th floor. She could not see into the offices from the street. The windows, at that height, reflected the sky more than they revealed the interior pale silver in the early morning, catching whatever light the November clouds permitted. But she could see whether the floor was lit. It always was, by 7:14. She had no way of knowing whether Nathan was already at his desk or still in the elevator or on his way from the east side. She had no way of knowing what he was working on or who he was meeting with or whether, on any given morning, the 11th voicemail in a queue of 14 was something he had thought about since the day he first heard it. She knew only that the lights on the 44th floor were on, which meant the building was running, which meant he was there or soon would be, which meant he was well. For Dorothy in those weeks, that was enough. It was a small enough thing that she was almost embarrassed by how much it steadied her. On a Wednesday morning, in the 3rd week of November, she was standing at her usual spot, collar up, hands in pockets, 7:17 by her watch, when she became aware of someone stopping beside her. She did not turn immediately. The sidewalk was full. People stopped at corners all the time. But the person beside her did not move on. After a moment, Dorothy turned. Rosa stood there in her heavy winter jacket, the green lunch bag over her shoulder, a paper cup in one hand, looking up at the 44th floor of 1 Whitfield Plaza with the calm, unhurried expression of someone who had decided that this was where she was going to be for the next few minutes and was entirely at peace with that decision. She did not ask what Dorothy was looking for. She did not ask how long this had been going on. She did not offer any observation about the building or the floor or the lights that were on behind the silver-gray glass. She just stood there. They stood together for 11 minutes. Dorothy knew because she checked her watch at the beginning and again at the end, a habit from years of shift work where time management was not optional. Then Rosa glanced at her own watch and said, "We're going to be late." Dorothy lowered her eyes from the 44th floor. She adjusted her collar. "We are," she agreed. They walked to the subway together. Neither of them looked back at the building. They didn't need to. Dorothy would be standing on that corner again tomorrow morning. She had been doing it every day. She was prepared to do it for as long as it took. The envelope arrived on his desk sometime during the afternoon while he was in a 2-hour session with the firm's risk committee. He found it at 5:47 after the last of the committee members had filed out and his assistant had left for the evening. A standard Meridian envelope, the same cream-colored stock, the same printed return address in the upper left corner, the same black ink on the tab that read, "Confidential addressee only." He had received the first one 2 months ago. He had not expected a second. He sat down. He opened it. The cover page read, "Supplemental Surveillance Report. 1 Whitfield Plaza, Perimeter, November, monitoring period." The executive summary was 3 paragraphs. The first established context, a reference to the original report and the subsequent access termination. The second noted that following the termination, Meridian's field team had continued periodic observation of the building's exterior as part of the contracted monitoring scope. The third paragraph was the one that required his attention. Subject has been observed on multiple occasions in the vicinity of the building's exterior perimeter, specifically at the northeast corner of 47th Street and Madison Avenue during morning hours between 7:10 and 7:30. Observation span of 14-day period. Subject does not attempt to enter the building. Subject stands at the noted location for periods ranging from 8 to 14 minutes before departing on foot toward the Lexington Avenue subway entrance. Behavior does not indicate active surveillance of the premises. Report attached for review. Nathan read the paragraph twice. Then he turned to the photographs. There were 6 of them this time, printed on the same Maddie stock as the originals. Telephoto shots taken from a distance, the focal length compressing the background so that the subject stood out clearly against the blur of morning foot traffic and the building's facade rising behind her. The woman in the photographs was the same woman from the first report, gray coat, hands in pockets, standing at the corner of 47th and Madison facing south. In the first report, the images had been taken from a wider angle. Corridor footage elevator lobby service areas. The resolution had been adequate for identification purposes, but not particularly detailed. These were different. Whoever Meridian had positioned on the street had used a longer lens, and the result was a level of clarity that the original report had not achieved. Nathan looked at the first photograph. Same gray coat, same posture. The woman was standing with her back to the coffee cart, looking up at something above street level. The November light was flat and pale, the kind of morning light that drains color from everything and makes the city look like a document that hasn't been finished yet. He noted the details Meridian had flagged as consistent with the original subject profile. He turned to the second photograph. He reached the fourth photograph and was about to turn the page. He stopped. There was something about the way she was standing. He could not have said in that first moment what it was. It was not the coat, which he did not recognize. It was not the location, which meant nothing to him beyond its proximity to the building. It was not anything he could have named as a data point or entered into a report. It was the posture, shoulders back, not in the practiced way of someone who had been told to stand straight, but in the way of someone for whom straightness had become structural, built in over decades, the residue of a person who had decided early that the world would not see her fold. Head tilted very slightly to the right. The weight distributed evenly, feet perhaps shoulder-width apart, the stance of someone prepared to stay exactly where they were for as long as necessary. He had seen that posture before. He knew this, the way you know something. Before you know it, a recognition that arrives in the body before it reaches the mind, a small, precise disturbance in the chest that has no name in professional vocabulary. He did not turn the page. He reached for his phone. He opened the photograph application. He held the phone over the printed image and took a picture of the fourth photograph. He opened the image on his screen. He zoomed in. The resolution held better than he expected. The telephoto lens had captured enough detail that enlarging the image on his phone screen did not immediately dissolve it into abstraction. The face was still visible. The features were still readable. He looked at the way she held her chin slightly elevated, not in defiance, but in the manner of someone watching something they cared about from a distance they had not chosen. He looked at the line of her jaw, the particular set of her mouth, not smiling, not frowning, simply present the expression of someone who had made peace with waiting. He zoomed in further. The image began to soften at the edges, the limits of the resolution becoming apparent, the pixels starting to assert themselves. But the center held. The face held. He looked at the eyes. They were looking upward, not at street level, not at the lobby, not at the lower floors. Upward, at something higher in the building, something above the reach of the street, something that could only be seen from below by someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. He had seen eyes look upward like that before. He had seen that particular angle, that particular combination of intention and restraint, that particular quality of looking at something you cannot touch from where you are standing. He sat very still. On his desk, the Meridian report lay open to the fourth photograph. Beside it, his phone screen showed the zoomed image slightly softened at the edges, the face still clear enough in the center. He did not close the report. He did not set down the phone. He did not call anyone or stand up or do any of the things a person does when they need to move through a realization rather than sit inside it. He zoomed in. The face was clearer now. There was something about the eyes, something he could not name, something that lived below language. He sat very still. The photograph was still open on his desk. He did not look away. He had not left the building. The city outside his window had gone through its quietest hours and come back out the other side. Traffic had thinned to almost nothing around 2 a.m, then slowly rebuilt delivery vehicles first, then early service workers, then the first taxis of the pre-dawn shift. By 5:30, Madison Avenue had enough movement to qualify as alive again. Nathan had watched most of it. He had not slept. The Meridian report lay where he had left it open, to the fourth photograph, his phone resting beside it, the zoomed image still on the screen from the night before. He had moved between the desk and the window chair, and back again, without deciding anything, listening at some point to the faint hum of a floor buffer, somewhere below the sound of a building maintaining itself while its occupants were absent. At 6:03, he picked up his phone. He went to his voicemail inbox directly. He scrolled back past the recent messages until he found the 11th in a queue that was now several weeks old. He had turned off the auto-delete setting sometime after the Q4 review without fully acknowledging why. He pressed play. "It's Mama. I just wanted to hear your voice." He listened the way you listen to something, when you are no longer pretending you are not listening. Not with the 3-second glance he had given it on a Thursday morning, between the 10th and 12th voicemails. With stillness. With the quality of attention you give something when you understand belatedly that it has been waiting for you to arrive at it properly. 11 seconds of silence first, then 9 words. He played it again. He stood up from the desk, while it was still running, rising, as though in response to it, as though standing was the only appropriate answer to what he had just heard, for the second time, with real attention. He played it a third time, standing facing the window. The city was fully awake now, on the other side of the glass. 44 floors below Madison Avenue had reached its early morning density bodies, moving in every direction, with the urgency of people who had somewhere to be. The sky to the east had gone from black to flat gray, the kind of pre-dawn light that makes the city look like a photograph taken slightly too early. He stood at the window and looked down. He was not looking for anything specific, or rather, he was looking for exactly one thing, and had not yet permitted himself to name it. He scanned the avenue below, the coffee cart on 49th already open, the intersections further south, the pedestrian signals, cycling, the taxis, moving in their early morning diagonal. His eyes moved south along Madison. 47th Street, the corner. There was a figure there. He saw it the way you see something you have been half expecting without admitting it, not as a discovery, but as a confirmation of something that had been sitting at the back of the mind long enough to acquire inevitability. A small figure in a dark coat standing at the northeast corner of 47th and Madison, with her back to the coffee cart, hands in her pockets, facing south. Facing up, from 44 floors, a person on the street is reduced to silhouette and suggestion. You cannot see a face. You cannot see the color of someone's eyes. You can see posture. You can see the angle of a head. You can see the particular way a person holds themselves when they are looking at something they care about, from a distance they have not chosen. He saw the shoulders straight, not rigid. He saw the head tilted slightly to the right. He saw the weight of her, distributed evenly, unhurried, the stance of someone who had arrived at this corner the same way every morning and intended to be here the same way tomorrow. He had seen that posture in a photograph the night before. He had seen it in a recognition that had no name, something that lived below the threshold of what he allowed himself to say out loud, even alone, even at 6 a.m, with no one else in the building. He was looking down. She was looking up. Between them, 44 floors of glass and steel and air. 847 nights. 14 months of silence. 11 seconds and 9 words. A badge deactivated on a Wednesday evening by a man who had not understood what he was doing. They could not see each other, not with the kind of clarity that allows recognition to complete itself. But the direction was the same. For the first time in more than 800 days, they were looking toward each other. The distance was still there. The glass was still there. The 44 floors were still there. He stayed at the window. The voicemail had ended. The phone was silent in his hand. Below, the figure in the dark coat had not moved. He noticed the small figure in the dark coat at the corner of 47th and Madison. He noticed the way she was looking up. He put the phone in his pocket. He stood very still. Then he moved. At 6:17 in the morning, Dorothy was doing what she had done every morning for the past several weeks. She was standing at the northeast corner of 47th Street and Madison Avenue, hands in the pockets of her gray wool coat, back to the coffee cart, looking up. The sky above the buildings was the particular shade of early winter gray that arrives before the sun has committed to anything. Not dark, not light, the city suspended between the two. The wind off the avenue was steady and cold, the kind that doesn't gust, but simply persists, finding the gap between collar and scarf the way it always did. Around her, the morning moved at its usual pace. The line at the coffee cart behind her had grown to 7 people. A delivery truck idled at the curb on 47th hazard lights blinking. A group of 3 office workers crossed the intersection, talking without looking up from their phones. The city was fully operational, as it always was by this hour. As it would be long after this hour, indifferent to the particular reasons any individual had for standing still within it. Dorothy looked up at the 44th floor. The lights were on. They were always on by this time. She stayed for 11 minutes, on most mornings, long enough to confirm what she came to confirm, short enough to make the commute to 610 Lexington without rushing. She had 4 minutes left. She was not thinking about anything in particular. This was one of the things she had learned about standing on this corner. After the first week, it stopped being about thought. It became something closer to presence. She was here. The building was there. The lights were on. That was the whole of it. She was not expecting anything to change. She noticed the movement, the way you notice something that doesn't fit the rhythm of a familiar scene. Not dramatically, not with alarm, but with the small, involuntary attention the mind pays to a disruption in pattern. Someone was moving against the flow. The morning foot traffic on Madison ran predominantly north, people heading uptown toward their offices, toward the subway entrances, toward the coffee carts, and the building lobbies that would absorb them for the next 8 hours. This person was moving south, and fast, cutting through the stream of bodies with the focused efficiency of someone who had a specific destination and was not going to be redirected by anything between here and there. She could not see the face yet. She could see the coat, dark, well-cut, the kind of coat that belonged in a lobby, rather than on a sidewalk at 6:17 in the morning, moving this quickly through pedestrian traffic, without apparent concern for what anyone around him made of it. She watched him coming without understanding why she was watching. Then the distance closed enough that she could see the face, and she understood. She did not move. This was not a decision. It was simply what her body did. It became still, the way it had become still in the lobby 3 weeks ago, when the badge reader had blinked red, the way it had become still in the parking structure, when she sat for 22 minutes watching the 44th floor. A stillness that was not absence, but its opposite absolute presence, every part of her attending to what was happening in front of her. Nathan came through the last 10 feet of foot traffic without slowing. He was not running. She registered this clearly, the way you register specific details when everything else has become background. He was walking faster than she had ever seen him walk. His breath was visible in the cold air. His coat was open at the collar, as though he had left the building without taking the time to button it properly, which she understood immediately, because it was exactly the kind of thing he would do when something else was more important. He stopped in front of her. The 2 feet of sidewalk between them held everything that the past 3 years had accumulated, the 847 nights, the 14 months of silence. Before that, the 4-minute call at an airport gate, the 31. Dismissed reminders, the badge that had blinked red twice, the 11 seconds of silence, on a voicemail, the 9 words she had left, because his voice on a recording was the closest she had come to speaking to him. All of it in 2 feet of cold November air. His breath came heavier than usual. She could see it, the slight unevenness of a man who had descended 44 floors of stairs, faster than was strictly necessary, and had arrived somewhere he had not allowed himself to arrive for a very long time. Around them, the city continued, without modification. The delivery truck on 47th moved on. The line at the coffee cart turned over. Another group of office workers crossed the intersection. Nobody slowed. Nobody looked. Nobody said anything first. Then Nathan stepped forward, and Dorothy felt his arms come around her, and she raised her hands and placed them on his back, and without thinking, without any thought at all, because this was older than thought, older than the distance that had grown between them, older than the building that bore his name, and the floors she had cleaned inside it. Her hands found the rhythm they had always known. A slow, steady pattern. The same one she had used when he was 8 years old and had come home from school, not wanting to talk about what had happened, standing at the kitchen counter in Queens with his back to the room, and she had come up behind him and put her hand between his shoulder blades and said nothing. Just this rhythm, this particular measure of presence that required no explanation and offered none. She had not used it in a long time. It came back without hesitation. They stood there on the sidewalk, two people in the middle of a city that was not watching, and the cold wind moved around them, and the morning continued its business, and neither of them spoke for a long time. Then, against her shoulder, his voice, quieter than she had ever heard it, quieter than the recording, quieter than the 6-minute call at JFK 14 months ago, quieter than anything. "You found me." Dorothy kept her hands where they were. She looked over his shoulder, at the avenue, at the buildings, at the pale gray sky above the rooflines, at the city that had held both of them for 3 years, without knowing it was doing so. "Mama, you were never lost. I was." They stood there for a long time. The city moved around them without slowing, without noticing. But Dorothy noticed. She noticed the way his shoulders shook. She noticed the way he held on. She thought this is why I came, not to clean his floors, to be here. When he finally needed somewhere to land, they sat down on the steps of a building 3 doors from the corner. Not by agreement. Nathan had stopped walking, and Dorothy had stopped beside him, and both of them understood, without saying so, that neither was ready to be anywhere else yet. The morning continued around them. People with coffees, people with phones, a bicycle messenger calling out to someone 2 blocks down. None of it required anything from them. 20 minutes passed this way. Dorothy sat with her hands in her lap. Nathan sat with his elbows on his knees, looking at the pavement between his shoes. The cold had settled in properly. Neither of them moved to leave. Then Nathan straightened. "My car is in the garage on 48th, he said. "All right," Dorothy said. They stood. They walked to 48th Street. The drive to Queens took 34 minutes. Nathan drove. Dorothy sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching the city shift around them, midtown, giving way to the bridges giving way to the outer boroughs. They did not speak much. He asked once if she was warm enough. She said yes. At some point, she turned and looked at him, the gray, beginning at his temples, that had not been there the last time she sat beside him in a car, and said nothing. She turned back to the window. He pulled onto Merrick Boulevard at 751 and parked in front of the house. The hallway was the same as it had always been. Nathan followed his mother inside and saw the photographs. The way you see things, you stopped registering decades ago, suddenly all at once, with new eyes. Age 5, birthday cake on his chin. Age 14, mid-stride at a track meet. Age 31, laughing at something off camera in a kitchen somewhere. And then nothing. The wall ended. The photograph stopped at 31 and did not resume. He stood in the hallway and looked at the place where the record had simply ceased. From the kitchen, Dorothy's voice, "Sit down. I'll make eggs." He sat in the chair he had sat in since he was 5 years old. The same position at the kitchen table. The same angle to the window. The same view of the backyard and the maple tree that had grown too tall, but that she had never been able to bring herself to have cut down. Some things in this house had not moved in 30 years. He was only now understanding why. Dorothy moved around the kitchen without looking for anything. Pan eggs, spatula, all exactly where they had always been. Nathan watched her. He had brought the Meridian report in from the car without planning to. His hands had simply taken it. He set it on the kitchen table. Dorothy glanced at it. She turned back to the stove. She did not ask what it was. She cracked 2 eggs into the pan and adjusted the heat and said nothing. And Nathan understood that she already knew enough of it, or more than enough. "How long, Mama?" he said. The eggs moved in the pan. She worked the spatula with the careful attention she gave everything she cooked. "Long enough," she said. It was the complete answer, and the only answer. Nathan looked at the report. He looked at his hands. His mother set a plate in front of him, eggs toast, a glass of orange juice poured without asking. She sat down across from him with her own plate. He did not pick up his fork. The kitchen was quiet. Outside the window, the maple tree moved in the November wind. And then in the kitchen of the house he had grown up in, sitting in the chair he had sat in since he was 5 years old, with a plate of eggs his mother had made, without being asked, Nathan put his face in his hands. He did not make a sound. This was the kind that didn't require one, the kind that arrives after a long time, of not when the last thing holding it back has finally quietly stepped aside. Dorothy reached across the table. She placed her hand over his. He felt it immediately, the texture of her palm, the roughness that had not been there 14 months ago, at an airport gate, the calluses that had built up slowly across 1,000 nights of work, the physical record of 3 years written into the skin of her hands without a single word of explanation. She let her hand be there. That was enough. Then when the quiet had held long enough, "You were busy. Mama knows. Mama was never angry. Mama just missed you." She did not say that she had spent 3 years on her knees on marble floors just to be in the same building as him. Some things a mother carries alone. That is not weakness. That is love in its purest and most devastating form. 2 weeks after a Tuesday morning, on the corner of 47th in Madison, Rosa Mendez arrived on the 44th floor alone. This had not happened before. Dorothy had always been here. First cart, already positioned. First office, already done. Tonight the hallway was empty in a different way. Not the emptiness of a building after hours. The emptiness of a space where someone used to be. Rosa unclipped her badge and started at the far end of the hallway, the way Dorothy had always started: conference room first, then the small kitchen, then the executive restroom, working toward the corner office. She had learned enough from years of walking beside someone to carry a few of that person's habits without meaning to. She reached the glass-walled corner office at 11:41. She stood in front of it. Through the glass, the desk, the chair, the city beyond the windows, the framed photograph on the shelf. She looked at the photograph, a woman and a young boy, the woman's smile directed somewhere off camera. She understood in that moment everything she had not been told and had not asked about. The badge that read Dorothy Wells, the years of night shifts, the corner of 47th and Madison every morning, the 11 minutes standing in the cold, looking up at a floor she was no longer allowed to enter. She reached over and adjusted the photograph on the shelf. A few degrees to the right, the same adjustment Dorothy had made for 847 nights, a goodbye that required no words and left no record. She turned off the light and finished the floor. The envelope was in her locker when her shift ended at 6:15. She opened it in the break room with her coat already on. 3 paragraphs. The first confirmed her new title, Night Operations Supervisor, effective the 1st of the following month. The second outlined the changes: a 40% increase in her hourly rate, full medical coverage enrollment in the company's pension program. The third noted the change had been initiated at the direct request of building management. Beneath the printed text in handwriting that was not from HR, "Thank you for standing beside her, NW." Rosa folded the letter carefully and put it in her bag against her chest. She walked to the service garage. She got in her car. She sat with her hands on the wheel and the engine off. She had not cried in this city before. In 7 years, she had not allowed herself that. There had always been another shift, another building, another floor to finish. She did now, quietly, briefly. Then she started the car and drove home. 3 months later, Nathan held a press conference on the ground floor of One Whitfield Plaza. The Dorothy Wells Fund would direct $3 million over 5 years toward expanded benefits, wage support, and professional development for custodial and night shift workers across New York City. A journalist asked why custodial workers specifically. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Because she cleaned my floors for nearly 3 years, he said, and I never once asked her name. After the press conference, he stopped at the security desk. Curtis looked up, the same Curtis who had stood at the lobby door on a November night and told a woman her badge had been deactivated, not knowing what he was part of. Nathan extended his hand. I don't think I've ever properly introduced myself. I'm Nathan. Curtis looked at the hand. He shook it. Curtis, I know who you are. I know, Nathan said. I should have asked sooner. 6 months after a Tuesday morning, on the corner of 47th and Madison, the penthouse on the 31st floor of East 72nd Street had a few things it had not had before. A second coffee mug, on the kitchen shelf, ceramic, slightly chipped at the rim, brought from a house on Merrick Boulevard in Queens, by a woman who said she didn't need it anymore now that she had a better view of the city. A standing dinner on Thursdays, and a habit Nathan had developed of leaving the office at a time that allowed him to be home before 7. On a Thursday evening in May, he came through the door at 6:48. The kitchen smelled of something that required time and the attention of a person who understood that feeding someone was one of the oldest ways of saying something that had no direct translation. Dorothy looked up from the counter. What are we having? Nathan said. Sit down, she said. You'll find out. He sat. He looked out the window at the city, the same streets, the same intersections, the same corners where people were still moving with the urgency of lives that required their full attention. Somewhere down there on a floor in a building he passed daily, someone was pushing a cart down a hallway at midnight, wiping a surface clean, moving through a space that would be filled again by morning with people who never thought to look down at the floors beneath their feet. Most people would never know their names. Most people would never think to ask. Nobody remembers the name of the person who cleaned the floors they walked across every day. But the person who cleaned those floors, they remember you. Every night, without missing one. If this story made you think of someone, a parent, a person who showed up for you quietly and asked for nothing in return, reach out. You don't need the right words. 11 seconds of silence and 9 words were enough for one woman to say everything she needed to say. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, stories about the people we overlook, the love we almost miss, the moments that change everything, stay with us. Leave a comment. When was the last time you called the person who raised you?